right now you logged into the home page. So on the home page,
Correct.
there's a couple of things I want to point out. Number one is, it gives you information about, the report, some information about cannabis, etc. There's two things I want to really point out. So there's a survey that is underneath the description of, so it says Begin Health Survey. So one of the things that we're looking at, DNA is your genetic predisposition. So we're going to show you your genotype, but how you express those genotypes, which is called a phenotype, is based on what it is that you're experiencing in the moment. So when your genes are turned on or triggered or expressed, that's called epigenetics. So the reason why we have a health survey is so we can provide you a personalized wellness plan. What I mean by that is we'll still show you genes that have a predisposition to being expressed, and certain genes can be controlled by lifestyle. So to give you an example of that is some genes, we inherit them from our parents, and they are 100% inherited. So our hair color, our eye color, pattern baldness, etc. Yeah, right. But certain ones you can actually control by lifestyle. So if you have a genetic predisposition towards insomnia, for instance, we'll show you insomnia, but you're saying, I sleep great, it doesn't bother me. So that gene is dormant, it hasn't been triggered. We'll give you the information about that gene, but if you're experiencing anxiety or you're experiencing inflammation in the moment, when you take the health survey and you answer those specific questions in your personalized wellness plan, we'll address those first because those are your immediate needs. So that's one thing. That's when you begin the health survey. And then what else we'll do is we'll follow up from time to time to see how whatever it is that you're consuming, if that's helping to mitigate that adverse event that you're experiencing. So it'll kind of guide us in that direction to find something that's more individualized. The second thing is drug interactions. So if you can see underneath, it says your survey-based reports. There's a little new badge. It says get your drug interaction report. So that drug interaction report, right there. So you can click it if you want. But basically what it does is it shows you different medications that have an effect with cannabinoids. So there are certain medications that people consume, prescription medication, that have that affect the efficacy, or cannabinoids affect the efficacy of certain prescription medications. So to go into not a tremendous amount of detail, but to give you examples, anything that's a serotonin inhibitor, like an SSRI, an anti-anxiety, an antidepressant, some of the cannabinoids actually interfere with the efficacy of that prescription medication. Also blood thinner medication. So it doesn't mean that you can't take cannabinoids if you're taking that medication. It just means don't take them at the same time, stagger. And how long you stagger.
It messes with the metabolism and essentially the bioavailability, or if you're looking to get delta, if you're taking, let's just say, THCA, it could inhibit that from metabolizing into whatever derivative that could have the efficacy.
Yes, but more on the other way around. So what it does in lay terms, and I know you can dive deeper in this, but just so other people can understand. So what it does, it can actually increase, decrease, or create toxicity in a certain medication. So depending on what type of metabolizer you are, you're genetically predisposed for. So if you take CBD, for instance, with your Paxil or whatever the, I don't know the brand names of all the SSRIs, but if you're taking that, what it can do, it can increase the efficacy. So now you're getting more of that into your bloodstream. It can decrease the efficacy, suppress it, depending on what type of metabolizer you are, or it can create toxicity by mixing negatively with that prescription medication. So if you're taking a blood thinner medication.
Is there anything out there that you know of that is doing that, but instead of increasing the efficacy or creating toxicity of the pharmaceutical product, where the pharmaceutical product is actually doing that to the cannabinoid?
We don't know. There's not been enough studies on there, but that's something we're looking at right now. I'm sure there is, because there is drug-to-drug interactions. So we're doing a clinical trial in Australia with a company called Ward Medication Management. And what they do is when people go in a hospital, they're given a drug, they own the database to see what other medications you're consuming, to see how that fifth medication is going to interact with the other medications. So there's absolutely, and the one thing that concerns me most, yes, SSRIs are an issue. There hasn't been any fatalities or anything of that nature, nothing major, maybe some discomfort or lack of that medication working. But on a blood thinner, what can happen is if it reduces the efficacy of your warfarin or your blood thinner medication, somebody can develop a clot and then, have a stroke or some of that. And then the headline on news will say, CBD caused stroke. So we want to be really, really careful of that drug interaction, just to be aware of, and you can have that conversation with your healthcare professional. But we provide you that information for you to decide what to do with. So, and then the rest of are your reports. So your reports, there are 60 reports. Now there's, I think, 68 with some of the new ones in 12 different categories. So I would start by clicking the overview, which gives you an indication of whether you have variants detected. I'm going to explain what that means. If you have a variant detected, one, you have an increased risk. If you have no variants detected, you have a decreased risk. And then you have multiple variants detected, you have, a pretty substantial risk. So the ones that are red are various variants detected, and I'll explain what that is when we click on our report. The ones that are yellow are slightly increased, and green is none. So if you want to kind of scroll down categories, whatever you want to click on, or you can start with one, and then we can go into more detail. I like the anxiety reports, like the stress or fear extinction. The reason why is because for me, I kind of, I don't know your history, your background, all that stuff, or anybody's, but it's sort of like putting pieces of the puzzle together. So I can just tell you what your genes are saying, and the expression on and off is up to you. That's the epigenetics. So that's the conversation we can have about what you've been experiencing.
So the reason I wanted to go over this with you was because all of the updates from, I think you sent me this about a year and a half ago was when I first took it. You've had a lot of significant updates since then. And the other day I got an email that said, hey, we have new reports, and I'm looking at them. And I'm sitting here like, holy crap, you literally just mapped out the past couple years of my life of different things that I've experienced. So what I'd like to do is share what's happened to me with my relationship with cannabis over the past 2.5, 3 years. And then as we're going through, have that in mind. And I think it'll definitely paint the same. Sorry, I just had a call come through. I think this will paint the picture as to why I'm so blown away by this. So I'll just dive right in, and I'll try not to stretch this too long. But about 2.5 years ago, I met a retired anesthesiologist from the Cleveland Clinic, and I was in San Diego. I was doing a presentation on a theory that I have regarding cannabis and the ketogenic diet and their synergies. It's actually quite phenomenal. And the way I kind of basically look at it is, the ultimate state for the human body is to be in an intermittent state of nutritional ketosis while supplementing the endocannabinoid system with phytonutrients from cannabis. There's a mouthful, but basically it means stick to a low carb diet, go into keto in and out throughout the, couple days on, couple days off, and supplement with cannabis. And when I say supplement, I mean that in the sense that you take what you need. Okay, and that's going to change, okay, based off of every individual. And so I was doing this experiment where I was doing very, very strict keto. I was consuming cannabis regularly. My weight loss continued to go down. My mental health was a lot better. I mean, there was a lot of elements of this that I saw over about a 2-year period where it was like, holy crap, I feel superhuman by having these two things together. So what we wanted to do is test how cannabis could help me recover from various states, also test how cannabis just affected me based on how it was consumed. So I was doing utilizing a bioimpedance device, which basically, it's a machine that you put these metal plates, you put your hands on, your feet on, you've got electrodes up to your temples, you got a pulse ox on your finger, and it tests various things about your overall physiology. It's by no means as accurate as a MRI, a CAT scan, or a lot of the even probably an EKG with some of the information, the data they're able to get from that with the new devices. But it's pretty interesting because it allows you to see pretty much where you're at for the most part. So I would do a scan. And we're doing this in my home. It's a portable device. So I would do a scan, and then I'd go smoke a joint, and we do another scan. Week later, do it scan, and I need it edible. Do another scan. We would do the same thing with with different vape pens, different ratios of cannabinoids. And then what we wanted to do is see how it would help me recover, especially with inflammation and just overall health, let's just say, at that time after cheating. So one night I went out and I ate and drank anything that had a carb in it, which is not normal for me. And the next day I woke up, we did a scan. So we have our baseline. And then I smoked a THC joint, did another scan. Then I smoked a CBD joint, and we did another scan. Well, the week later, we did it opposite. When I did the scan after I was hungover and dehydrated, I smoked a CBD joint, and then I smoked a THC joint. And halfway through the scan, they have you hold your breath for 15 seconds and then stand to see how your blood pressure basically stabilizes with that. Well, about 10 seconds into holding my breath, I said, I'm going to pass out now. And I passed out. And I came to, and I saw all these black dots everywhere. It was really bizarre. It was weird. And I was high, so I was definitely even further uncomfortable. And then I passed out again. So I woke up, and I was on the floor. My bad knee got caught up in the table and re-dislocated and partially retore some of my ligaments, I believe. My heart rate was about 160, sitting still. He had my legs up to get the blood flow back to my brain because I passed out. And again, I'm super high, and I experienced this, and it was terrible. My blood pressure dropped below 95 over something or other. I can't remember. My now fiance is a nurse, so she came out and was like, what is going on? So I had this traumatic, let's say, experience, okay? So I gave myself a few days break, and then I started consuming again. And I got to the point where I was good to go. I could do my normal dose edible, which I was a low dose edible between 10 and 30 milligrams. And I would smoke, maybe a bowl or two throughout the night, a little hit here or there. And I had vape pens, and I was fine. I could consume regularly and daily. And about 6 months later, I got high one night, and suddenly I went into this maybe PTSD, anxiety type of thing from the situation. My heart rate went up, and I started getting in my head. Next thing you know, I'm sitting still, and my heart rate is about 140, 150. So I didn't know what to do. I was home by myself. My fiance started, her first night shift as a nurse at the new hospital, so I couldn't call her. And I was just out of my mind. It was terrible. It lasted about 4 hours, okay? So a couple days later, or I gave it a week off, smoked again, happened again. Give it a little break, couple weeks break. Then I was slowly getting back up into it, 2.5 milligram edible, 5 milligram edible. Took a 10 milligram edible, thought I was good to go. We're out, headed to a baseball game, had a complete panic attack. My heart rate was up and everything. So I had been on this roller coaster. I tried every product, everything, to see if I could overcome this, and I haven't been able to. The only thing I can consume without any type of anxiety, maybe mild occasionally, but I never get to the point where my heart rate gets up and I get in my head, is Delta 8 THC. It has a much weaker affinity for the CB1 receptor. I think it has a lot to do with it. But I still consume cannabis, but on the hemp side of things. But THC, we don't get along anymore. And I cannot get high without going into a anxious state. And I believe it has to do with the PTSD that stemmed from that experiment where I'm laying on the ground, my knees killing me, my heart rate's through the roof, and I felt like I had zero control, and I was terrified. I had no idea. I was terrified. And one thing I will state is I'm saying PTSD here, and people who may be watching have war PTSD, being mugged, beat up, raped, abused, whatever it may be. And I by no means compare my PTSD to yours. But I will say is that everyone's experience of any type of neurological or mood disorder or PTSD or something like that, you can't compare them, because how you experience it is how you experience it. Fortunately, mine only triggers when I'm high, not all the time. But even now, since this happened, I am also older, I'm 34 now, I do occasionally get anxiety in situations that I never did before. So that's my experience, and that's why a lot of the things that came up here that we can go through really struck a nerve with me. And part of me thinks that if I saw this 2 or 3 years ago, this report, I would have been like, none of this stuff bothers me. The other thing is maybe I would have thought, well, I got to be careful because I have potential to trigger these genetic markers, the epigenetics, and this could be my reality if I'm not careful. So let's dive in.
Yeah, no, correct. Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, I've heard this story, unfortunately, more and more over the last few years. My personal belief, it is the increase of THC that we're consuming. So if you have genetic predispositions and you have some potential for adverse events from THC, if we were consuming, I'm a lot older than you. So back in the day when we used to smoke a joint, if you have 7% THC or close to 10%, you're like, I remember these old guys were like, well, one beer equals one joint. Well, not anymore. So
no,
if you can't measure that way. So that if you have a genetic predisposition and you're consuming high levels of THC, it's much more likely that genetic predisposition will be triggered as an epigenetic experience. I've had a woman recently who she has, I believe it's MS, but she's been a consumer of cannabis as her medicine for the last 15 years. She consumes on a daily basis, and one day she took a concentrate. I believe it was a dab hit or something of that nature. As soon as she took it, she had a panic attack. She's never had one in her life. After that, she goes back and consumes her regular dose of cannabis, and she has a panic attack every single time. So when we did the test, we found, a genetic profile for her, suggested a ratio, and we'll go into that, that is much more leveled and even with cannabinoids, and changed her terpene profile. And she wrote us an email and said, and we don't do testimonials and all that stuff for many different reasons, but she wrote us an email, which was on point. She said, now that I found my ratio, my personalized ratio, it allows me to be me again. So she's gotten that phytocannabinoid exactly geared to her needs because it's personalized. So now she's able to consume that without triggering that genetic expression. And, genes are interesting because it's not just one gene. It's a combination of certain things that kind of triggers things. So if we can go in, like your anxiety reports, we can click that, and I'll kind of try to put the piece of the puzzle together, whichever one you want to start with.
Well, we can jump through them all. What's interesting is I have all 3 variants are detected for each thing.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So I want to start off with FOS. So I'll explain how the report works. It gives you your summary findings, tells you have a variant detected, and I'll explain what that is. It gives you a genotype that you have a faster rate of memory extinction, which actually goes along with PTSD because it kind of replays the movie back in your head. And you also have the gene that's associated with fight or flight, which is FA. So I'm going to start with FA because FA is one of my favorite endocannabinoid system SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms. And the reason why FA is so interesting to me, it has a lot to do with THC and the CB1 receptor and fight or flight. So what FA does, it actually degrades anandamide. So what happens to you is when we're stressed, and normally in everyday life, we have an event that triggers dopamine, adrenaline, norepinephrine, and cortisol into your bloodstream. So we're stressed, somebody cuts us off in traffic, bam, we have this event. It's normal, that's our fight or flight. When we start realizing the lion isn't chasing us in the jungle, we're safe, then our body tries to go back to normal. One of the things it does, it releases anandamide on its own to get you back to homeostasis so you can kind of extinguish that fight or flight. So as you know, and many people know, that's your sort of bliss hormone. That's your endogenous endocannabinoid that is the THC somewhat mimics in a way. So what happens is when we have that anandamide released, then among other things, chemicals, our body gets back to normal. So no lying, homeostasis, back, and we're chill. What happens is some people, so over time, when we have stressful events, the more cortisol that we produce in our bodies, cortisol actually raises your pH level. So you become more acidic over time. Your immune system really doesn't like that. So it does what's like an overactive immune response. And we're familiar with that because of the cytokines with COVID, what's going on with that. So some people may be able to associate that a little bit more. But over time, your immune system addresses those areas of cortisol, of high pH with inflammation. So people walk around with inflamed joints, usually ankles, knees, etc., because you have this fight with your immune system. If left unattended, it starts moving into gut health. So this is my theory, my assumption. This is over 14,000 plus participants who use this. So we have patterns to be able to support this. But I'm just sharing this theory. So what happens over time? It moves into gut health, and people start experiencing IBD, IBS kind of symptoms, etc., because of all this cortisol. It's and you're a chef, so being acidic is not good for you. So
yeah, and that makes sense. That makes sense as well, because like I know just serotonin alone, 95% of serotonin is in your gut, and only 5% is actually in your brain. And there's more overall neurotransmitter release in your gut than there is your brain. And when you have anything that's out of bounds, especially a cortisol or testosterone or estrogen or anything like that, and they all work together. And I'm guessing this is now leading into how Fa is regulating that cortisol response, and that equilibrium is important. So it makes sense that it would attack the gut. And my guess is at the same time that it's attacking a gut and people are experiencing any type of gut health, they're also experiencing neurological or mood disorder, depression, anxiety, possibly even manic styles of depression, depending on how it's actually how bad it is.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And we have two brains, and you're absolutely right. We have our gut brain and we have our brain. So and that's why the two receptor areas are really important. You have to be able to address both. Your CB2 receptors with those with CBD, and there is a need for THC. And when I say there's a need, so think about Fa as Pac-Man. Well, what it does, it eats up anandamide. So depending on your genotype, and you can close this down and then scroll down a little bit, and I'll show you your genotype in Fa. So you have what's called, so I'll explain how to read the report. So there's a couple things on here. It gives you the gene, the name of the gene, single nucleotide polymorphism. Then it gives you your marker, which is called your RSID, and that shows you where that's located in the chromosome. And then it gives you your genotype. So your genotype is what you inherit from your parents. The genes actually, like our computers have a binary code underneath all the user interface, it's ones and zeros. Our genes speak in 4 letters. They're called nucleotides. It's a C, a T, an A, and a G. The combination of those letters make us who we are. That's your genetic material that's programmed to make you who you are. You inherit them from your parents. When you have the same exact one, it's called homozygous. When you have 2 different ones, it's called heterozygous. Maybe a little too sciencey, but just some basic information. So in this genotype, what this means on Fa, that you produce less anandamide than the average population. And if you want to see what the average population is, or you can actually click, it says, how do you compare to other populations underneath any one of those. Okay. Yeah, well, any one of them, it's fine. You can click on that one and just see. So depending on what your ethnicity is, what your general population, if you're African, if you're East Asian, some people experience this gene or walk around with this gene or this genotype predisposition more than the average. So somewhere around half of the population has this genotype. It doesn't mean it's going to be triggered, but they have it. And this is the knowledge that you're talking about. If I know this, what can I do about this? So because you produce less anandamide than the average population based on your genotype, a little bit of THC is that supplement that you were just talking about. It actually helps to stimulate the anandamide that you're deficient in, and it's fine. But what happens is, this is where the fine line with THC is. If you take a little bit too much THC, it triggers that fight or flight. It triggers that stress response in you immediately. And that's going to happen over time. And because I noticed on your other report, you also have a predisposition to PTSD, now because you had that adverse event, it's sort of replaying that movie in your mind over and over to be able to show that you can experience that same thing. And as I was saying, I'm putting the piece of the puzzles together. Certain genotypes are associated with early childhood trauma. So you have an increased risk of PTSD if you experienced trauma in your early childhood, usually teen years or somewhere before 7 years old. So what happens is,
how would you describe some examples of trauma? Because my mind's blank when I think of childhood trauma. I was in a small car accident. I was stung 20 times in the head by hornets. But I don't have I'm fortunate that I wasn't abused. I didn't have anything terrible like that. But there may be some people listening that are curious about, what would you define as trauma?
Trauma is your own definition. It's some of the things that you mentioned. Abuse is one of them. Maybe somebody left you in Disneyland for 5 hours when you were a kid and you couldn't find your parents. There's all kinds of different things that happen that creates trauma for us as kids. So the definition of that, being stung by hornets, can be a pretty traumatic event versus, I fell off a tree and, broke my ankle. Whatever that is, these are all pieces of the puzzle that put together. So what happens is, when you're actually predisposed to that and you already triggered your genetic expression, so that gene is on. The genes are turned on and off. That gene is on.
Even breaking my wrist, my pinky, dislocating my knee several times, having surgery, I physically injured myself through sports and whatnot many times as a child. So that could have, even though I don't recognize that as I don't have PTSD from it, so to speak, or anything like that. I'm very aware of what I can and can't do with my legs and my body in general. But you're saying that traumatic, whether it be emotional or physical, or a combination of the two, is what then, so to speak, stimulates that epigenetic response to this gene marker that says, okay, I'm here and I'm sticking around.
Yeah, it's as it says here, it increases the risk of hyperarousal and PTSD symptoms after experiencing traumatic event. Your definition of traumatic event belongs to you. I'm a big believer. What cannabis does, it actually turns things off for us to experience different things that we suppress normally. So normally we suppress different things, we turn them off. I don't want to remember my event. But what happens is, when those receptors get bound, your inhibitions or your memory, what you're suppressing, is open to you. So now you have to deal with that. And because you're dealing with certain things that came from your trauma, I mean, this is, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a doctor, I'm just reading tea leaves, you know what I'm saying? So I'm putting the piece of the puzzle together, but there's patterns to that. And if you're experiencing that and you've actually triggered that fight or flight, now, because you're already in the mode of stress, which actually, the same way that you got cut off in traffic, that's the same thing that THC is doing to you right now. But also, it's replaying the movie in your head that was somewhat suppressed. So it's a combination of, I had early childhood trauma, I'm replaying that movie, and what just happened to me a month ago. So now, I don't know if this is the appropriate platform, but if somebody has ever done a psychedelic before.
I was just thinking that, and I want to share something as well.
Okay. So I mean, I can be really open because I don't really, I don't care. But if you had psychedelics, which I have, and I've had experiences with people, it's an immediate thing, or it gets in your head, oh my God, and then you're able with, with people or yourself, you're able to kind of guide you through the experience. Well, if you can't guide you through the experience, you can actually accelerate that experience and build on top, and have a pretty negative, situation happen to you. So it's similar to that I would equate if somebody can relate to.
Well, I'll be open about it. After the experience where I passed out and had that, shortly after, I started microdosing with psilocybin. And microdosing is in like a 1/4 gram. And then I would do a dose, so a 1 gram dose. And each time I did it, I would end up smoking at the end. And it was after that things got bad. It was after that I couldn't get high anymore without this happening. And I was, one of my business partners is very into the world of psychedelics and plant medicine and things like that. And what he explained to me, he said that most likely what happened is the experience from the psychedelic opened up it made me much more sensitive and vulnerable to not just the world, but my world, my memories, and everything within. And that alone should have been left alone. That when I combined the cannabis into there, that response to it from that other substance was not a good combo. It is for some, but it wasn't for me. So he thinks that since it opened it up and made me more sensitive, and then I consumed, and it brought on that anxiety afterwards, even though I didn't feel like I was anxious, my epigenetic response to it was. So I have a feeling, and this is where, I'm all about people being able to consume what they want. I don't think any drugs should be illegal. I'm all about personal accountability and taking responsibility for your decisions. There's cause and effect. There's Darwinism. It's survival of the fittest. Like, that's kind of the way I perceive a lot of things in the world. So, but with that being said, there's like I said, there's cause and effect. There's risk to anything, whether it's using cannabis in a legal state, using it as a medicine, and I do this because I don't believe that it's always a medicine, and I think this is a perfect example. Cannabis can be a medicine, but there's hundreds of compounds in there, and the ratio of whatnot could really steer you in the wrong direction, as we're discussing here. But I think people should be able to consume what they want. But at the same time, I wish everyone had access to a report or something like this, or had expert medical advice, or a guide in the psychedelic world, or even a guide in the cannabis world, to be able to explain to them what to experience, even in a way provide some placebo to help this be a more positive situation. But the thing is, placebo is phenomenal, but after a while it can stop working. And if your genetic expression is saying, yeah, your placebo is not going to last, check this out. And I noticed there was actually a placebo marker in here, which I found very interesting, or a variant. But anyway, I think people should be able to consume what they want, but I wish that there was more data so people could do it in a safer way. And I'm excited to see how that technology evolves, and maybe the Endo DNA will evolve into some other realms of consumption as well.
Yeah. That's the direction we're heading. So this whole experience with COVID, it actually, in the conversation I had with medical professionals and other people, we can see that there is a failure of the healthcare system, and not pointing fingers. It just is. It's a fact. So being able to empower yourself with information and knowledge, and start working on your own preventative health is important. You have to start with your DNA. We're all different. Your genetics are your foundation. And then there's other things that go along with it. So I do all the DNA tests, not only health condition ones, I do ones from vitamins and nutrients, which we're going to be offering very soon as well, to see what supplements work genetically. I do microbiome testing to see what my gut bacteria is, so I can take my own personalized probiotic. So all this stuff helps empower individuals to make better choices and better decisions in their own overall health. And understanding the reason why we did Endo, we started Endo, is not so, hey, I can find the best strain for myself or anything like that. It's so people can avoid, or we can help people avoid an adverse event, because we know they exist. We know adverse events exist from cannabis. Anybody that says, oh, it's great, you didn't have that, it's wonderful, but some people do. So in order for you to experience or to have an optimal experience with cannabis, you should know your pitfalls. So we look at ourselves as a GPS. So we're telling you that this road over here has traffic, it has road construction, and you have to be aware this road over here is a much better road. It doesn't guarantee there's not going to be a pothole along the way, but at least you have knowledge. And that's what we want to do. We want to let people know, and everything that we put on here has a peer-reviewed reference. By the way, we build AI that allows us, and the reason why you're getting updates is because we're not only are we involved in clinical studies, but we're also able to get clinical studies as they're published. We go through an AI algorithm to see if that study actually fits what we're going to communicate. And then we have a board, and on our board, on science board, is Dr. Ethan Russo, Dr. Mike Tagan, Dr. Chris Spooner, Dr. Doug Smith, myself, and we analyze and we say, we vote, are these studies good enough to add, to our reports? So you have ongoing research. So if something new comes out, you'll get an update. So we're always looking for peer-reviewed studies, and there's plenty of them, not enough, but we're also contributing to those things. So that's where you get, ongoing research as well.
Well, that's awesome. You had that built in because, if someone pays for something and it's a one-time deal, there's that value. But if they know that they're going to continuously be getting information as it comes out based off of their data, I think that that's really, really valuable. One of the things that a couple years ago, when I finally really started diving into the research of cannabis, I started realizing how much of it is cherry-picked. How much of it is based off of just cell culture studies or in vitro studies that have they open up the door to then open up the door to mice, to open up the door to human studies, but a lot of the studies and research and articles about cannabis I think are complete rubbish. I think that a lot of them are very, very misleading. And they started with the conclusion and they built the study around the conclusion instead of saying, I have an idea, let's do this study and then see what happens. And it's very easy to manipulate data, very, very easy, or ways to make it seem like the data is sound, using words like may, might, and possibly. And when you see these, like I trigger words in research, I get, I pump the brakes. So I'm not saying that the data on science is not true. I'm just saying that a lot of it is not accurate. So if you're basing things off of peer-reviewed studies, right there, that's like the first thing. It's not just some random meta-analysis or a case study or something like that. It is peer-reviewed, and even if it is a mouse model, mouse models do give a lot of insight to what can happen with humans. But the biggest thing that I look at when I'm reading these studies is always I say it's consumption determines function. So it is what you're consuming, how you're consuming it, what the dose is, and what other things are you consuming it with. So is it an edible? Is it through inhalation? Is it an injection? Is it sublingual? Is it, look at the dose. A lot of the CBD dosing, it's 5 to 25 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, sometimes upwards of several times a day for, CBD isolate. And then you look at Sativex, which is roughly a 1-to-1 of CBD to THC, several times a day as well. So I always look at these very important things called, especially dosing. And that really shifted the way I looked at cannabis. And then I started experiencing these negative side effects. And then I started reading research on others experiencing negative side effects. And that's okay. I mean, it sucks that it happens, but it's okay. It doesn't mean cannabis isn't good. It's phenomenal. It just means that you have to find that right profile and that right ratio that is, like you say, everyone is definitely a little snowflake. Everyone is a unique little butterfly. And there are categories of people, I would say the majority of people who get high are fine with it. But then there's the outliers like me that, I can't handle it anymore.
I just think some people don't admit. So I've worked with a lot of veterans and athletes, and they don't want to say, like, I'll just give you an example. I had an athlete that I was working with, and he said, you know, when these linemen are chasing you, you're in your zone. There's no stress. Everything is slow. They're all pro. They're in their element. When they sit home and it's a sunny day, they open up the window, the birds are chirping, that anxiety starts. And that is, there's a gene called COMT, and it's in your report too, COMT, and they call it the warrior gene. And that gene, when you're on that fence and you're consuming, and I hate using sativas and indicas because, you know, I don't believe there's such thing. The profile, the terpene profile of that cultivar is more sativa-like. So what happens is, because you're also consuming THC, it's stimulating. So you're already stimulated, and you're stimulating yourself, and you don't want to tell anybody that you're having anxiety because you're a 300-pound lineman who played in the NFL and all pro, and you know, and you smoked weed forever, and all of a sudden you have that, and you don't want to tell anybody. So it's much more prevalent. And also, you mentioned method of consumption. A lot of it has to do with what type of metabolizer you are. So I was looking at your report. You know, if you're a rapid on average metabolizer, then you're fine with edibles. But some people, you know, they're a poor metabolizer of THC through their digestive system. And not only do you have the conversion to 11-oxyhydroxide, but which is, you know, more powerful than just consuming cannabis. But also, if you're a poor metabolizer and you consume the same amount as I consume at the same time, it can actually have an adverse event. But think about it this way. If that happens, and you also have AKT1, which is a gene associated with psychosis-like effects. Now,
which I have.
you have, right. Now you have that gene triggered. You took more THC than you were supposed to, I guess, and you have that loop that's playing in your head. So you have the trifecta, and that's when you have this adverse event. So there are ways to mitigate those things. Understanding your whole picture, and then being able to go into a report and say, okay, what can I take? What's my profile, depending on what I'm experiencing? So if you click on any one of these, whatever report you want, just choose one, and I can show you how what we mean by that.
So one that I found very interesting was mood report and response to social situations, high or sober or even drinking. After I saw this and I read about the way you broke it down, I was thinking about, there have been many of times where I've been out and everyone's having a blast and I'm just kind of like, meh. And it's generally associated with larger, like, it's not an anxiety thing. It's like, it's just that I have no interest. I'm not, there's not like a bandwagon effect at times. It's not like I'm a grump all the time, but I remember there's been many situations where I've been out with the lady and her friends or other people, and it's like everyone's having a great time, and I'm just like, okay, well, I'm here. I'm not angry about it, but I'm not hooting and hollering and having a blast with everyone else. So I found this very interesting.
Yeah, and there are different genes. So, and like I said, all putting the piece of the puzzle together. This one doesn't have a specific recommendation or suggestion in there because it's informational purpose. So, but there are ones that have to do with faces too. So when I was talking about putting the piece of the puzzle together, if you recognize a face socially that reminds you of an event that you had that created a negative experience in your life previously in adolescence, and you have a PTSD trigger and you consume cannabis, so now you saw, you saw Bob out in a party, Bob triggered that memory in you, that movie plays, you're high, and you're in the corner, kind of having this panic attack as well. So we've heard, people are having those experiences before. If you don't mind, if you can go back to one of the other, let's try one of the anxiety ones or having to do with stress, since that's something you experience. I just want to show how the report works, where it can make suggestions on mitigation of some of those. So any one of them, stress reactivity or whatever you want to pick. So in the beginning, we tell you that you have an elevated risk, and then in the suggestion, we have a suggestion of cannabinoids and terpenes that are more aligned if you experience it, or if you're trying to prevent the possible expression of that gene. And so we suggest more of a higher CBD to THC ratio, and everything has studies associated with it. So you click on the pop-up, if you want to close that down and click on where it says response, the word response, and tells you about the ingredients. So we tell you information about cannabinoids, and there are studies associated with that. This study may not be specific to this genotype, but it goes in depth about what cannabinoids do in your body and how THC and CBD works, and it gives you that reference. The other thing is we talk about terpene profiles that are more associated with your potential genetic expression or your genotype. So linalool, for instance, has been shown in studies to lessen the anxiety that's provoked by THC. Beta-caryophyllene, as you know, I'm sure, it also helps to address the inflammation. So as you're having this cortisol buildup that creates the inflammation in your joints, beta-caryophyllene helps to reduce that inflammation. Together, in concert, those cannabinoids and terpenes alone, they may not have that effect. Together, they have shown to have a more therapeutic type of effect for this profile.